Okay. I've just been handed a card called The Real Catfish. This is the story that Neef Schulman does not want you to hear. All right, everybody knows what a catfish is. Dr. Phil knows what a catfish is. A catfish is someone who goes online pretending to be somebody else for whatever reason. But where did the word catfish come from? Well, obviously it came from the movie, Catfish the movie, right? Did anybody see Catfish the movie? Well, I saw Catfish the movie, and if any of you saw Catfish the movie, do you know why it's called catfish as opposed to flounder or trout or even elephant? Why catfish of all animals? Why are these people called catfishes? Nobody knows. I know. Here's what happened. In the movie, Catfish the movie, Neef, everybody knows Neef gets catfished. And he goes to Michigan to track down this woman he thinks he's in love with, and it turns out that she's fake. But he meets the woman who's catfishing him. I can't remember her name, but Andrea, I think it was. And this woman is living in Michigan, and she has two severely disabled stepsons who are like 12 or 13 years old, who are completely like nonverbal. They're not toilet trained. I mean, these kids are developmentally, challenged. And she's married to an older guy who's like works on the railroad or something. So she basically lives a very isolated life. That's why she created this catfish, this fake profile of the girl that Neef fell in love with. So now we're at the end of the movie. The catfish has been revealed. Everybody now knows that this woman is faking. That the whole thing was a fake. There was no 19-year-old daughter that was in love with Neef. And somebody decides to interview the husband. This is the guy who works in the railroad. He's like older. He's like 10 years older than this woman. And it's his two sons that she's taking care of. And he knows nothing about this catfish business. This is all something she did on her own. He knew nothing about it. But apparently somebody stuck a microphone in his face and a camera and said, "What do you think of all this?" And here's what he said. He goes, "Okay. I mean, this guy's like, works on the railroad. And he's going to tell this whole story about the catfish. And he says, there was a time when when cod fish were being exported from Alaska to Japan on ships, container ships. He said there would be these big ships, and they'd have these big round tanks on the deck of the ship, and the fish would be in these tanks, and they would go all the way to Japan from Alaska. But the fish had to stay alive. They had to be alive because if they died, they couldn't be used for food once they got to Japan. And what they found was, after making this long trip across the ocean, a large number of these fish died. These cod died in the tanks. So they needed to figure out a way to keep them alive. And what they realized was that these cod were sitting in these tanks and they were stagnant. In other words, they weren't moving, and therefore they weren't getting oxygen in through their lungs and through their gills, and that's why they were dying. So they needed to find a way to make the cod continuously swim around these tanks in order to oxygenate themselves to stay alive. So some resourceful scientist came up with this theory that if you put live catfish, in the tank with the cod, what the catfish do is they nip the tail fins of the cod. They don't damage the fish, they don't kill the fish. It's still good to eat, but that's what catfish do. They nip the tail fins of these cod, and by nipping the tail fins of the cod, it makes the cod swim faster, and they live and they survive to the trip to Japan. So in the real story, the catfish is the hero, right? The catfish saved the day. The catfish is the one that got the cod shipment all the way over to Japan alive. But that's not the way it's presented in the show. If you ever watch the show Catfish, I don't care how sincere or how sympathetic or how pathetic the catfish turns out to be at the end of the show, the catfish is always the bad guy, right? The catfish is always the bad guy, and Neef always tells them, don't do that anymore. Don't do any more catfishing. Every single show ends the same way. And sure enough, 2 months later, right, they do a 2-month follow-up, and whenever they have the victim, right, the person who was catfished, their demeanor is always, I'm so happy. My life has changed so much. That's because the catfish was swimming around the tank, nipping at your toe. Basically, it kept you on your toes. Catfish keeps people on their toes. That's the real catfish story right there. That's the story of the real catfish. Please be sure to read my book, Broccoli Time by Dante Allen, the best parenting book ever written. Only $3 on Amazon. Peace and love.